Hi, in this video we're going to look at outcome A1, absolute value. It's in section 7.1 of your textbook. So let's get right into it. All right, so an absolute value, what is that? Well, what it does is it represents the magnitude of a number. And magnitude means how big it is. Or we can also think of it as the distance from zero on a number line. So right here we have our number line. How far away is it from zero? Now, 5, the absolute value of 5 is just 5, which says that 5 is 5 away from 0. And negative 5 is the absolute value of negative 5 is also 5, which if we find negative 5 right here, we see that it's 5 away from 0. And the absolute value of 0, well, 0 is 0 units away from 0. Okay, so now let's have a look at our first example where we're going to show that the absolute value of negative 7. So the absolute value of negative 7, it equals, let's see, how far away is it from 0? Well, if we look here, we note that it is 7 units away from 0. And if we look at the absolute value of positive 7, that is, if we find 7 on our number line, we note that it is also 7 units away from 0. Just looking at notation here, if we look at how functions are written, we can see that the absolute value of a can have two answers. So it is positive a if the value of a is positive, and it's negative a if the value of a is negative. So we have two things that we need to look at here. So if we're looking at evaluating the absolute value of positive 3, that's simply 3. Part B, the absolute value of negative 7, that's 7. The absolute value of 9 is 9. The absolute value of negative 12 is 12. And the absolute value of 0 is 0. All right, so now looking at our next question here, we're going to try to write the real numbers in order from least to greatest. So a good idea is to have a look at where these numbers fall on the number line. So take a second and evaluate what each number is. So here are each of the numbers evaluated. And the first one here, we got 4.8. It becomes positive 4.8. This one has no absolute value bars. It remains negative 3.8. Here we end up with 4. This, negative 3.4. This is positive 2.3 after you evaluate the absolute value sign. This one here, negative 3.4, the absolute value of is 3.4. And right here, this one, there's no absolute value bars, so we end up with negative 3.75. And our last one ends up being a positive 2.5 because of the absolute value sign. Now take a second and order these numbers on the number line. And what I want you to do is write the original numbers down, okay? All right, so here are those numbers ordered on the number line. Hopefully I've got them all. I think they're all there. I think you can probably do a better job than I have just fitting them in nicer. Okay, so now we're going to evaluate absolute value expressions, and just want to highlight that the term expression is a mathematical statement and there is no equal sign. All right, so here in part A, let's figure out what the absolute value of 4 minus the absolute value of negative 6 is. So first, figure out the absolute value portions. So the absolute value of 4 is simply 4. Then we want to subtract, and the absolute value of negative 6 is 6. So we've got 4 minus 6, which equals negative 2. Okay, so in our next question, we're going to look at is 5 minus 3 and times the absolute value of 2 minus 7. So first we need to figure out this 2 minus 7 part. So let's do that. So it's going to be 5 minus 3. And then in the absolute value, that ends up being -5. And if we evaluate the absolute value right here, that ends up being +5. So now we've got 5 minus 3 times 5. And we've got 5 minus 15, which ends up giving us an answer of -10. Okay, so now our next question is a little more involved. We've got a few more things that we have to do. Just note that the absolute values are on the very outside. So we have to evaluate every single thing in here first. And why don't you hit pause, give this one a try, and see what you end up with. Okay, so here it is for C. First, you want to make sure you figure out this bracket here, ends up giving you -2. Square that, that becomes a 4. Then you've got -2 times 4, which is -8. And as we move along, we continue with that +6 there. And now at this point, we can evaluate -8 plus 6, and that gives us a -2 within the absolute value sign. And finally, evaluating the absolute value sign on the outside of everything, we end up with a result of 2. And our final question here, with an absolute value sign around our -4 and our -3, that becomes 4 minus 3, and our final answer for this question is 1. So there you have it, folks. We are going to finish off with 2 more questions. I want you to give this a try. I don't want you to keep watching. I want you to hit pause and give this one a try right now. All right, so now for part E, let's look at this. You've got -12 plus 8. All of that is inside of the absolute value sign. So you need to figure out -12 plus 8 first. That gives you -4. And then taking account for the absolute value, you have 4. And our last question. So we want to evaluate this 12 times -3 first. That gives you -36. Your 5 squared gives you 25. So you've got -36 plus 25. That's all in the absolute value sign. You've got -11 right here after you evaluate this. And taking into account your absolute value sign, you end up with +11. So hopefully this was informative and it helps you have a better understanding of what an absolute value is. I want you to make sure that you do the exercises and get some practice with this. All right, good luck.